Buenos dias, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. If we can just take our seats, we'll kick off. It's great to see so many of you here again for the last day of our conference, especially after the great gala dinner hosted last night by Jack Cooper. It's always a bit of a test to see who makes it the next day, but you all have done pretty well. It's always a bit dangerous to put a bunch of land-loving truckers and railroad companies and car manufacturers out at sea. You know, I saw a few kind of running to the sides, looking a bit yellow at some point, but I think the port processing guys and shipping guys pulled you through in the end, so that was good. Sorry to be a bit of a bore, but I have to go on a little bit again about our evaluation forms. We've only got a few back so far, and they are really important, as we said, as Louis and I have said over the last day. We have some great prizes this year at the end of the conference. There's, I hope I get it right, a 4-ball, not a foursome, just in case anyone misunderstood that yesterday, at the one of the golf courses, Oak, yeah. And then we also have some fudge, some Harrods fudge, so some typical British sweets there for you. So stick around, fill in, give us your feedback, and we look forward to sharing that with you at the end of the conference. Once again, this session is being streamed live via our website, via our live service. So there are people around the world who can be tuning in, hopefully more in Mexico as well, given our subject matter this morning. And as we've said, you can participate with that as well by asking questions and making comments. At the end, a bit of a reminder as well. So the reason that you're sat in tables today is the next session we're going to have some roundtable discussions, some think tanks. So it's going to be a chance to kind of get into more intimate groups and talk amongst yourselves. So that's why we're sat this way. And at the very end of the day, we also have some special demonstrations with some equipment, which we'll have some food and some drinks as well there. So there's plenty of reason to stick around. If anybody has booked an early flight, you can still change that and stay with us through the day. We're going to make it worth your while. So now to the matter at hand. For those of you who were here yesterday or were paying attention yesterday, obviously Mexico, you can't really go too long in this sector now of finished vehicle logistics in North America without talking about Mexico, for all the obvious reasons that I probably don't need to stand up here and quote figures back to you. Most of you have heard the path to 5 million units and many more exports, and I'm going to let our presenters share some more detailed data for you. But obviously, almost every major car maker, certainly serving North America, is investing or has invested in Mexico, or those who are there are expanding, and that's brought with it many challenges, many of them to do with finished vehicle logistics, whether it's rail capacity, whether it's port space. Most recently, perhaps, whether it's also truck haul away, because the domestic market is growing very strong there, and imports are rising actually even faster than exports, the growth rate at least at the moment, which is causing some maybe unexpected strain. So it's a lot of logistics issues. And then I would, having spent some time there and speaking to people, there's other challenges as well, whether it's security, whether it's bureaucracy, dealing with different authorities to get certain things built, or to lease space, or even sometimes to just get bills paid, as some people were explaining to me yesterday. So there's plenty of challenges to work through. But having spent quite a bit of time there myself now, I can say this is an amazing place to do business, an amazing culture, a lot of fun, and there's so much happening and so much room and opportunity to make a difference right now, I think, and that's what's fun for us at Automotive Logistics, because we're there in the ground floor and get a chance to bring people together and see things happen, but especially for the people in this room. They need your expertise, and the market really does depend on the know-how and knowledge that's current in this industry. So that's why we've put together a panel of experts. You can tell by their Hispanic names. We've got the best and brightest from the Irish-American diaspora, I think, in Mexico. But no, actually, as you'll soon find out, they are all doing interesting things, companies very relevant to what's happening in Mexico right now. We'll have presentations from everybody. Let me introduce you. Patrick Foran, who's from the HOD Operations Support from GLOVIS America, who of course part of the Hyundai group, and Kia just having opened an important plant, or just launching an important plant near Monterrey. So that'll be a very interesting perspective. Kelley Anderson, the Vice President of Automotive for Kansas City Railroad, Kansas City Southern, which of course has a Mexican division, which is one of the two Class 1 railroads in Mexico, and one of the most important for serving exports from Mexico by rail to the US. Bill Kerrigan, who many of you have known, perhaps again in slightly different colors to what he's on stage today, but is now Vice President of Logistics for SSA Marine, which, again, one of the most important handling port processes in Mexico at some of the major ports there, and with some big plans ahead. And then with a slightly different perspective, actually, we have, those of you know, we do conferences around the world, including in Asia. And Vegard Synnes is from CDC International Logistics, which is a major third-party and finished vehicle logistics provider in China. And so what we're going to do, and this was actually partly inspired by our China conference when we spoke with some delegates, I think, who had attended from the US, who were really interested to see the differences and comparisons between North America and China, including in relation to Mexico. For those of you who don't know it, you might be surprised to see the multimodal picture that we have in China that is actually in some ways more advanced for some modes, I would say, than even perhaps in North America. So it's a chance to sort of reflect and pull back and see, and then maybe see if there's lessons that we can apply to this market here as well. So that's our panel. I don't want to waste any more of your time on that. I'm going to hand over to Patrick, but we do look forward to your questions at the end.
Well, good morning, everyone. You know, I just, before I get into, I have a few slides that I wanted to share with you. But before I get into them, for the last 16 some years, I've been a member of the Hyundai Automotive Group in one capacity or another. And with many of you in this room, I've worked with or have worked with your companies. So I just want to thank you. I want to thank everyone in the room that has helped me and helped my group get cars delivered to dealers, because that's what we do, whether it's by land, whether rail, sea, we get cars delivered to dealers, and the dealers make it happen for us. And so I want to thank you for helping us get our product delivered to dealers. The first thing, you know, I've been very privileged to be to have been involved to some degree in Kia Motors Mexico new factory in Pasqueria, Nuevo Leon, Mexico. The campus there is absolutely huge. There's a huge industrial infrastructure there. There's over 2 square miles of developed industrial campus there. Just absolutely amazing. Mass production started last month. So, you know, we're already beginning to get cars through. Now, our portion of it is the Vehicle Processing Center. So this picture, it's a little dated, it's about 3 months old, is of the Vehicle Processing Center in Pasqueria. It's on the southern end of the campus. And what we'll be doing in this building, where I should say my sister company, GLOVIS Mexico, will be doing in this building, is they'll be doing vehicle inspections, they'll be doing some accessory work as well. And it's a very well-equipped modern building. You see on this slide here, this is the area where we're going to be installing, or GLOVIS Mexico will be installing accessories on cars at the direction of the distributors that will be supplied out of this, which initially that's Kia Motor America, Kia Motor Mexico, and Kia Canada Incorporated. And this is usually what we're all very interested in, the rubber hitting the road. This is it's actually a picture of a pre-production Forte coming down the assembly line about a month and a half ago, before start of mass production. But you know, this is what we do for a living. We build cars, we deliver cars, and we sell cars. And so actually seeing cars coming off the line, to me, is a pretty exciting thing. But this is the most important part of it. You know, my experience in Mexico, my observations have been with the people connected with the Kia Motors Mexico project and my sister company, GLOVIS Mexico, is that the people there don't want a job. They want a career. They want to be part of the future. They want to be part of something great. The people are going to make it a success, just like they do everywhere, just like they make it a success in your organizations. They're going to make it a success here in Mexico. And to me, that's very exciting, because it's always all about the people. And that's what's going to drive Kia Motors Mexico to great success in building and getting cars shipped out to all of the distributors. So thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much, Patrick. I think that's a good place to kick us off and give us a little sense, obviously, of the project down there, but raising, I think, that critical point about the people. And I think anybody who does do business in Mexico, as I mentioned, I mean, it's a fantastic culture and great to work with. There are, you know, tremendous human resources challenges as well to make sure that the training and is maintained and that turnover is dealt with and things. So, and with some car makers going into some of the same areas, perhaps there are some important challenges around there to consider as well. So that's a good point to start on, I think. And now I'd like to invite Kelley Anderson from Kansas City Southern.
Where's Steve Tripp at? Get back here. I'm going to come out of character a little bit and talk about something I don't deserve, okay? I didn't deserve it, but I got it, and a lot of people would take credit for something they didn't deserve. Mark, you're probably a guy that might do that. I'm not going to do it. Probably belongs to Sarah, but if anybody took the time to read through the bios, and I don't know why you would, but somebody did. Yesterday, I get an email from about 9 o'clock yesterday morning from Steve Tripp, and he says, "Nice bio." So I opened it up and read my bio. And it says the very last line, it says, "Included in the Automotive News, 100 leading women listing." I came close. I didn't make the 100. I want to thank Louis and Nemish and the rest of the team at Logistics Group here for the great audience and all the participation and such, and all the sponsors. Last night was terrific. Thank Cooper, and the lunch yesterday was outstanding. The golf was great. I want to especially thank the customers. I saw Brian Burkhart here someplace staring at me probably for some rail cars, but in any event, not for our customers, none of us would be here. So thank you, our customers, for all the support that we get. I'm hoping when I'm done with this presentation, I've got about 15 slides. The first half are slides that you've seen before, so I'm going to go through them pretty fast, and then I'm going to get into some stuff that you probably aren't necessarily up to speed on what's happening in Mexico. Just to give you a reference point, I work for Kansas City Southern. We connect with all the Class 1 railroads. We're strategically positioned north and south. We have 11 intermodal ramps. We run about 6,400 miles of track. We have about 6,700, 6,600 employees, serve 15 automotive plants, and we have 4 of our own automotive facilities. If you look at the audience in Mexico over the last 55 years, by the time you get to 2019, there'll be 21 plants down there. And about 57% of those plants have grown from 2005 to 2019. So we're seeing a lot of growth. I don't think it's not news to anybody in here, a lot of growth in Mexico. If you take a little closer look at what's happening in this last go-around, we've got about 56% of the growth is going to take place from 2015 to 2020. And there's a couple things that, as a transportation provider, that you want to understand. Okay, the first thing is that of this production coming out of Mexico, how does it shake itself out in terms of where it goes? So this is one of those percent of a percent, and I'll break this thing down. So you got all the production in Mexico at 100%. You break it out and you say how much is actually going to go to the Mexico market, and then the non-Mexico market. So you got to have an 81 export piece, which is something other than domestic. Mexico at 19%, and then you take another cut at it and says how much is going to the United States and Canada, which is a lot of interest on our side, and it's about 85%, 15 to the rest of the world. Then you take another cut at it, and this other cut was sort of interesting, and I'll say this: when I think of infrastructure, this is one of the themes of the discussion. I think of track and yards and how do we flow all this stuff through terminals, et cetera. I don't necessarily put equipment in there, but the bottom line is that a lot of the problems that we had in Mexico is because we didn't have enough flow of equipment into Mexico, and the customers have to have equipment to move their product out of Mexico. It's pretty simple. So they had to find an alternative, so they found one, a cost-effective alternative, which is short sea. So because of our inability to really serve our customers at a certain time, it went on ocean. And I think there's a reason for it, and probably a good reason for it, but we in the rail industry are doing everything we possibly can to try to turn that around and provide them the product that they're looking for at a price that makes sense for them. I'll come clean again, and that is, I was on a panel here about maybe 3 years ago at this conference, and this is before the problems that the rail industry had. So when I was asked to be a participant in the panel, I said, why would I want to get up in front of this group and be able to put the happy face on Mexico when Mexico really didn't have a happy face relative to equipment flow? And some of my colleagues, Dave Fleener's over here with me in Santa Fe and others, stood here and they took a lot of heat, I would say, because the product wasn't where it needed to be. Rail cars were not prevalent. So subsequent to that time, the leadership of the rail industry, and they came clean. They came together and said, we got to do something about this. So they created new rules within TTX, the leadership of TTX. I know David Sellers is probably here someplace. They put together a rulemaking, and they penalized railroads for not having enough equipment in there. So the pool of equipment got much higher, number one. Number two, some railroads had a lot of business coming on in the energy sector. And that came on so fast in the U.S. because infrastructure in the U.S., unlike Mexico, allows it to come up fast. And as a railroad, you have to, as a common carrier, you have an obligation to move that product. So they had to move the product. They did everything they could. Be in Santa Fe to cite a good example of some company that's willing to put a lot of money out there, put, I'm going to say, close to $7 billion into their infrastructure to take care of that. So one of the things I want to leave you here with when you leave, if nothing else, you'd have to ask yourself, if you watch any of the murder mystery shows on TV, you always ask yourself, what's the motive? Why do they do what they do? There's not a railroad out there that is afraid of spending money, and they don't want to get behind growth because they didn't have enough locomotives, they didn't have enough crews, they didn't have enough infrastructure. So the rail industry is keenly aware of the growth. There's a lot of growth in Mexico and automotive, but there's another piece of the story. Now let's take a look at what the capacity is. Here's a question that came to me a long time ago, and that was, what is all this VIN count, 1 million VINs, what does that really translate to in terms of how many more trains a day? So I'm going to go through the math. We'll go through the incremental change of export product in Mexico from 2015 to 2016 is roughly 200,000 units. 85% of that is going to U.S. and Canada, and I'll take the whole 85%. I won't take another 81% that break out that go short sea. We'll take it all just to give you a demonstration of what this really translates to. 85% of that 210,000, 178,500 VINs going north. If you look at, you know, the bi-level, tri-level, it's going to be either 10, could be 15, could be 17. We'll take an average and say there's about 12 VINs per rail car. So you divide the 178 VINs by 12, and you get 14,875 rail cars a year. Take those rail cars and divide it by 68, which is a real small train, but let's be conservative. 68 rail cars divided into that number would give you how many total trains a year? 219 total trains a year. You divide that by working days, you got about 240 working days. So you got 0.9 additional trains that the railroads on this total collectively, there's 2 railroads down there, are going to move almost 1 more train. Now, I'd like to say all that business is coming our way, but it probably won't, and let's assume that half of it does. So essentially, I've got about a half a train. Now, you'll also understand that in Mexico, we don't run pure networks. So I'm not running a full 100% Chicago train. I'm running blocks of trains to hand off to U.S. railroads. As density gets bigger, it purifies your network, it purifies your trains, and now you're going point to point. I'm not stopping, I'm not have to switching, I don't have to do work, I can increase my speed, and with increased speed, you increase capacity. So bottom line here is if you look at the 3 years, 16, 18, and 20, you get the export VINs from 178,000 to almost a little over 1.5 million, and it gives you how many trains per day. From the 1950s through the 1990s, there was a conservative American radio broadcaster for ABC radio networks. His name was Paul Harvey. He used to have an old trademark. It was known for his old-fashioned plain talk, one heard around the dinner table on Sunday. And he started out with one of his catchphrases, "Hello, Americans, this is Paul Harvey." For those who remember Paul Harvey, you relate to my next phrase, and I'll use it shortly. But in Mexico, you not only have automotive, which is relatively small in terms of its mix, and this percentage isn't unlike the aggregation of all the railroads in the U.S. Class 1s. It's around that 10% kind of range if you aggregate the railroads in terms of how big automotive is. And so you got 9% automotive, but if you throw in the funnel effect of all the products that go into our business, it gets much bigger. So if you look at all the stuff that's auto-related, it probably comes into that 17% range. So the bottom line is, and the rest of the story is, besides the growth in finished vehicles, there's going to be a lot more growth in Mexico with the funnel effect of other products. There's one other thing that's happening out there, and this took place in 1938. President of Mexico was named Lázaro Cárdenas, and he passed a law that basically nationalized the oil industry in Mexico, and Pemex was a monopoly for almost 75 years. Well, in 2013, they privatized the oil reform, and the reason they privatized it because they had corruption, they had an unstable economy, and they had to do something about the rising demand for oil, jet fuel, diesel, et cetera. So the red line is an indication of what that line looks like. The yellow line in the middle is what their production is, and the black line is the import. So what's going to happen in Mexico, in addition to the funnel effect and the finished vehicles, we're going to start to see the advent of the regulation of fuel. The other thing is, here's an indication of what is also going to happen over time. It won't happen as fast as it did in the United States because the infrastructure is so much better in the United States. But if you look at the natural gas wells in Texas, and this is in that Laredo area, and you look at what's happening in Mexico, the slide is evident that there's a lot of natural resources in Mexico. So over time, we'll see pipe, and we'll see drilling, and we'll see all kinds of other things coming into Mexico. The reason I bring this up really speaks to the fact is that the railroads are going to invest in Mexico because of the top line, not only proven production that the automobile companies have given us, but also all the other products are coming to Mexico. When it comes to infrastructure, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this. I find it sort of unsexy. If you go to any customer and you talk about what you're going to do to try to satisfy the demand, you talk about sidings, you talk about bridge projects, you talk about terminals, and the customers don't seem to get too excited about that. But what it is, it gives you the ability to run your railroad more effectively. You can see that we as a company, we're pretty close to 600 million, and the FXE is 400 million. That 600 million is combined both in U.S. and in Mexico. Here's something that when I was asked to come up and speak on the panel, Nemish had asked if I would talk about the Celaya bypass. And I've talked to the bypass until I'm kind of blue in the face, but I'll give you the bottom line. It's probably one of the most important projects in Mexico. And the government has made a commitment to take the center of this crosshair in the city of Celaya, pictured on your left side. And the red north-south line is our line, and the green east-west is the FXE line. We go through the city of Celaya, and if you think about going through a city, whether you're going through Atlanta in a car, you're going through, and it's jam-packed, you're going to go through a city at very slow speeds, you got lots of crossings, and then you come up to a point where you're going to have to stop because you got a green light at a crossing. So the city of Celaya created, with the government's help, a notion of we're going to just bypass this whole city and create a much better throughput, et cetera, with the train structure. The project's about 70% done. The government ran out of money, so between the two railroads, we're working with the government to figure out what we can do to advance this project. The project was supposed to be completed by now. Again, 70% done. There's about maybe 200 million left to finish it. As a company, we operate in a small yard in Nuevo Laredo. And if you look at the comparative between Nuevo Laredo, it is essentially, the yard is in Nuevo Laredo. It's about 70 miles of track in that yard. And we're building a new yard at Sanchez. It's got a long plan to it in 2023, depending on how fast we grow. That yard is about 120 miles. So that yard itself is about 10 miles south of the border, will allow our train structures to come in, chamber themselves up, and as the bridge opens up, cross into the U.S. and conversely come from the U.S. into Mexico. This is an example of some other infrastructure changes. I think some of the people that deal with the ports, today our company doesn't actively go into Veracruz, and the reason is that we don't get in there directly. We have to hand off to our competition. The port is somewhat congested, and the advent of cycle time on a rail car is too slow. So the decision was made that we're going to hold off unless we're asked to go in there by customers, which we have been today. We're going to hold off until this bypass is done. The good news is the infrastructure in Veracruz, and it's indicated by Santa Fe. So when you get to Santa Fe, the blue line is the 12 miles that the port itself is building with double-track rail infrastructure. They've got about 2 more miles to complete it. We've been told that they should have that done sometime in 2017. When they get it done, the good news is we'll be able to get in there effective with our rail cars. The bad news is, and Bill will talk about that, and that is the port still has issues with berthing, et cetera. So now you can get in there pretty well, but when you get in there, that's where the concern comes in. I know yesterday Dennis Mans talked a lot about decisions. If you think about the railroad really doesn't have that much of a problem in terms of meet passes, sidings. We can increase our siding lengths. We can build yards, et cetera. The problems is when you get to the destination areas and they're jam-packed, where do you go? And I've gotten comments from other OEMs that said that the railroads are really having a hard time at Veracruz with theft. Well, Veracruz is holding trains out because the port can't take the rail cars in. Now, it doesn't happen in our railroad, but it's happened to our competition. So as that rail train sits outside that port, inside those cities, it lends itself to theft. So you have to ask yourself, what's the problem? Is the problem that you've got too much congestion in the port of Veracruz, or you've got too much theft in the area of Veracruz? Probably a combination of both. Technology, part of the whole answer to our success with building capacity really comes in terms of some of the technology. And as you get into some of the younger people in their businesses, they're taking advantage of the technology that's out there, the train scheduling, locomotive optimization, inventory management. These are some of the platforms that we're using to try to help us increase our train speeds. And then when you get into security, here's some things that people always talk about. I guess some of us are TV watchers and we're trying to solve the crime. So you talk about how many dogs and how many guard points and how many agents, how many patrol vehicles. Typically, that's what people want to talk about. The bottom line is Whitetronics, some of the counterintelligence, some of the video surveillances, some of the technology inside our security models make for a very successful program. So our security team does a terrific job, not only with normal stuff that you would do to try to prevent cargo theft, but also with some of the other technologies. So with that, you know the rest of the story. There's a lot of growth in Mexico. Our companies in Mexico are not afraid to spend money to stay ahead of the curve. Car supply is good right now, and the infrastructure is in place to take care of the growth. So we look forward to your business, and we look forward to taking on as much as we possibly can. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelley. I think that was a great overview. And I think it was a big miss on Automotive News Point. You truly do deserve to be one of the top 100 women in the automotive industry. Although with your Paul Harvey references, I'm wondering if it's not one of those under 100 years old kind of sort of things. No, but seriously, that's, I think... we're known to take our little playful jibes at the railroads here, but I think you did get a really good sense of the investment, of what's happening on the ground there, of the capacity that is available, and also where the challenges sometimes are. It's certainly not necessarily as simple as more rail wagons are needed or more track. I mean, there's the bypass projects you've heard about, there's security, but certainly Kansas City and the other railroads in Mexico are handling that very well and seem to have the capacity to grow with the market. But as Kelley referenced, there are some issues elsewhere, certainly in the ports, and that's something Bill Kerrigan will be able to speak to us about now.
Somebody said I need a soapbox to stand on, so I was a little bit taller, platform shoes, but they didn't leave them up here. Well, good morning. My name is Bill Kerrigan. I've known many of you in the past because I've been here as a consultant, and I was fortunate enough in the past year to hook up with a great company called SSA Marine. I'll talk about them for a little bit, and I have a couple slides about Mexico, about what we're doing down there, our role in moving vehicles safely back to the United States. First, I want to thank Louis and Chris and Matt and Nemish, whoever he is, for putting on another great event this year with the sponsors. It's always fun to come out to California. I don't think anybody complains about that. So I also want to thank our customers who are in the room today. We appreciate your support, and we look forward to working with you down in Mexico and the other places in the world where we have your business, and look forward to what's coming in the future. A little bit about SSA Marine. It was formed in 1949 up in the Pacific Northwest. We've been around for over 65 years. We are truly a global terminal operating company. We major in containers. We kind of minor in what we call conventional or break bulk and auto ro-ro. On the auto side, we have some major hubs throughout the world. In Panama, where we have Joe Carrillo, who's representing us from Panama today. We have a huge transshipment facility down there. Obviously, Mexico, South Africa, where we handle about 400,000 vehicles a year. And we do stevedoring in the U.S. and Canada also. So collectively, we do about 1.7 million cars worldwide. SSA, as a corporation, decided to take a leap of faith, and they decided to put an auto division together, and we formed that as of January 1st of this year. The auto division is headquartered in Mexico City and directed by Pablo Chico, who is our director. And we've put together a really, really good team of young men and women down in Mexico who are directing this effort that we're going to have, because Mexico is obviously the forefront of North America when it comes to vehicle production now. And our role is to help you folks get your vehicles, as I said, safely back to the U.S. and Canada and elsewhere in parts of the world. Briefly, in Mexico today, we operate facilities in Acapulco, Manzanillo, Veracruz. We've been in Lázaro Cárdenas since 2013, and we were recently awarded a concession to build a specialized auto terminal down there. We have plans to invest $50 million US in that terminal to build 2 berths and over 100 acres of property. We expect to have the construction started in the 4th quarter of this year. We're very excited about this. It's really a greenfield project for us, and it's going to allow us not only to handle automobiles, but handle ro-ro cargoes of all types and natures down there. We have high hopes that we can, the west coast of Mexico will be a bridge and transshipment facility for the whole west coast of South America and, you know, for short sea back into the United States. I pulled this slide off from a friend of mine who sent me from the UK, and Chris claims that he doesn't own the company, but I'm not so sure. But it gives a really good snapshot of what's going on and what they think is going to happen in the next 4, 5, 6 years. You know, we used to call them, you know, there's lies, there's damn lies, and there's statistics. Well, you know, this is my view on what it is. We had a really good explanation from Pricewaterhouse the other day, and the numbers are pretty close. But if you look at that top number of 4.8 million going into 2020, what strikes me is that the rail piece is going to stay relatively stable, according to this company. So there's not going to be much of an increase between what is railed back to NAFTA or what goes from ocean back to NAFTA. So that's a combination. What strikes out to me is that you're going to go from 500,000 to the rest of from the rest of the world to 1.7 million. Well, the only way those things can go to the rest of the world is by ocean. So that means we're going to put a lot more pressure on the ports than we have now down in Mexico, and that's going to be the challenge for us going forward as a, you know, terminal operating company. How are we going to meet your expectations when it comes to shipping these vehicles, not only back to short sea back to the U.S. and Canada, but to the rest of the world? And so I'm just going to go through some talking points that I hope we can explain upon and expand upon, you know, in our next half hour, 40 minutes. You have questions, I'm not sure we have all the answers, but collectively, this is what we have to do together, because we have to make the operations in Mexico more efficient to handle this increase in number that's going to be coming at us. Moving to metal, right? That's what we're here to do. Our roles as partners in the logistics chain, I see it as terminal operators and processors, is to basically be able to take everybody who has a piece of that logistics chain, put them in the room and say, how do we do it better? Again, as terminal operators, processors, and stevedores, we have a responsibility to safely and with a quality effort take care of those cars once we receive them, get them on the vessels, and give you the information that you need so you can get to your ongoing suppliers back in the States or wherever they might be, what's coming at them so they can plan their part of the move. Safely moving vehicles through the ports, that's job one. That's always what we have to do, all right? Keep the damage to as low as possible that we can, identify where problems are, and work together again with the other providers in the chain to find out how we can improve the process. With you guys, we need to decide the KPIs that basically we have to adhere to and that we need to be held accountable to. The challenges. Port infrastructure and capacity. Kelley mentioned this before. It's going to be a challenge. As in most ports, and it's not just Mexico, most ports, US, Europe, any place you handle automobiles have been pieced together. They weren't laid out, as Bill Robbins or anybody from Transdevelopment will tell you, 5 years ago. These were not greenfield projects. They were pieced together over years and years and years. So they don't actually work, in an ideal way. So we have to basically sit down with the port authorities, with the OPPs, and say, how do we piece together this puzzle so that it works for everybody? Dwell time. This is the key to moving freight in Mexico. We need to reduce dwell time at the ports so we can get a better throughput at these facilities. And the only way we can do that is to work with our logistic chains partners, whether it be the railroads, the trucking companies, obviously the OEMs, so they can tell us what's coming at us, so that we can reduce dwell time at the ports. This is the only way. We're not going to build any more space down there. I know Veracruz has a new facility that's been on the books for 15, 20 years. We hope it's going to come on tomorrow, but it's not going to come on tomorrow. So we have to make do with the space that we have now and make it more efficient. Again, I spoke about the coordination. We need all the players in the room. This is something I want to hope we can get together in Mexico and do a little bit better job of through our OEMs, customers, that we sit in the same room and say, how do we each improve our part of logistics chain to make it move, the moves more even and, improve the dwell times I mentioned before. Forecasts. I think we always talk about forecasts at these events. We need you to come to us and give us a better number sometimes than we get. Tell us what's coming at us. We know there are challenges from the time that they leave the plants to get to the ports, but the better numbers that we have knowing to come at us at the ports, we can prepare our labor force to do the optimal job that we need to do, to lay out the port property efficiently so that when that vessel arrives, we can get it loaded and get it out of there. Planning. One of the things we like to do is we're going to sit down with each of our OEM customers and look by plant and by mode. How are we going to receive that product, whether it be Veracruz, Acapulco, Lazaro, Tuxpan, Altamira? How are we going to receive that product, by what mode, and where's it going to get to us and in what time frame? Rail, haulaway, ocean, terminal operator coordination. I actually just met Kelley for the first time last week, and we've had some really good discussions about how we can help each other and help you and how we can coordinate these deliveries. The partner discussions, plant to destination KPIs. I assume you folks have those in mind of what you want us to do. We need to be sitting down with you and reviewing those things every month, every quarter, so we can help you do a better job. And this is the key, I think, going forward is we've talked to a lot of our customers, and they're looking at what mode is best for what USA region. We know we're going to have to use rail. We know there's going to be some short sea. We know there's probably going to be some truck involved. But what mode makes best sense for what region going back to the U.S.? Is short sea better off for, let's say, the long haul back into the New York, New England area? Is rail obviously best for the Southeast and middle and Midwest? These are decisions that obviously the OEMs are going to have to make in conjunction with their supply chain partners. But we want to be in the room so we can know what's coming at us so we can do a better job. Thanks for your attention and look forward to your questions.
Thanks again, Bill. Again, lots of things there to pick up on that I think we can discuss in the Q&A. Now, you've had some perspectives from a manufacturer point of view, from the railroads and from the port side. So I think you're getting a good sense of what sort of, the state of play in Mexico is. Before we move on to the Q&A, like I'd mentioned at the beginning, we're going to kind of pull back a little bit, Google Earth style, and sort of look a little bit across continents here and do some comparisons. And that's why I'm pleased to invite Vegard Synnes from CDC International Logistics to talk about differences between China and North America.
Okay, good morning. Glad to be here. Glad to see everyone who made it off the boat yesterday. My name is Vegard. I'm from CDC International Logistics, and as Christopher mentioned, I'll be doing kind of a comparison between Chinese and North American transportation networks with an emphasis on RoRo and rail. So first, a quick introduction to CDC and to our mother company and close partner, Changzhou Logistics, and the services we offer. CDC was established in 2011 in order to provide RoRo services and parts logistics for Changzhou's clients. We're the only private-owned RoRo operator in China, and we're currently operating down the eastern coast of China and up the Yangtze River. Changzhou Logistics is the biggest private-owned automotive logistic company in China. They're focusing on road transportation, and they held around 12% of the finished vehicle market in China in 2015. They're also the leading operator of the China-Russia-Europe railway routes, going from Harbin in China to Hamburg in Germany. So first, for just a quick overview, I'm sure you have seen these numbers several times. What I want to emphasize here is that there is a lot of metal moving going on, and these activities are set to increase a lot in the coming years. We are currently in what some have termed the integration and information era, and as was mentioned before here, that utilizing networks using all modes of transportation are now more important than ever. We have seen, especially in China, that road transportation is facing several issues or difficulties. Some in the States as well, but I think the trucking sector here is doing pretty well now, so I'm happy for you being in that business over here. However, in China, we see, as was mentioned yesterday, there's new regulations on the length of our carriers. There's also some problems shipping between provinces that have led to a pretty high increase in unit price in the previous years. We see between Shanghai and Beijing, the unit price used to be around 1,400 RMB last year. This year it's increased to roughly 2,000 RMB. This is a pretty big increase there. And that's also why we believe that Ro-Ro and rail will probably be more relevant in China, and some of the reason why I choose to focus on these transportation modes and these networks for this presentation. So first, for a quick look at the Chinese railway network. We say that about 20% of finished vehicle transportation in China is done by rail. The railway network is almost exclusively state-owned. However, they have been encouraging so-called private-public partnerships in recent years. There's a lot of expansion going on. You can see this, for example, through the One Belt, One Road strategy, where the Chinese government aims at connecting China with other Asian countries and also with Europe. Last year, around 126 billion US dollars were invested in the Chinese railway network, as well as both international and domestic, but it's quite a high number. And also around 9,000 kilometers of new track were laid. Another focus is on improving the high-speed railways, something that we hope in the coming years will take some of the passenger capacity off of the traditional railways, making it more lucrative for also the automotive industry to utilize this more. For a quick look at the US and Mexico railway network, you guys know this better than me, but from what I found, around 2/3 of finished vehicle transportation in the US is done by rail, and around 80, we heard Kelley saying 87% of their business crossing the border is done by rail, and also there's a lot of investment going on. But pretty much to summarize, I think we can say that you have a pretty efficient railway system here, at least in the US. For a side-by-side comparison, we can see that the ownership in China is mainly state-owned, while Northern America is dominated by private ownership. Lengthwise increase percentage-wise, between 2008 and 2014, was a bit greater in China than what you see in the States. However, this has not led to a high increase in capacity in the Chinese railway network. The railways lack the proper equipment to transport finished vehicles. Big city accommodation is a problem. There's not enough storage space in the big cities. And also commodities like steel and coal are taking up a lot of the capacity. This is something that we've seen have led to fairly high MOQs, and the price for transporting finished vehicles by rail compared to road and Ro-Ro is relatively high. From what we've experienced, utilization rates for automotive and the Chinese railway network have been pretty stable in recent years. In North America, from what I've heard, you're experiencing both capacity and service level that is higher than ever before here, or at least since the 90s or so. So it's good for you. You have some problems and challenges here, as was mentioned before, but I'm sure you know this. One thing I want to point out, however, is that the challenges we face in China seem to be much more of a structural kind than what you're facing here. Also, looking at the improvement focus, in China, they seem to be focusing more on improving capacity and reach, while I think here you're focusing more on improving the efficiency of the established network. Okay, over to the Chinese Ro-Ro network. You can see all the Ro-Ro, the harbors in China who are currently facilitating for Ro-Ro shipping, dotted out on the map here. If you tilt your head, you can kind of see how it looks like a T, what we call the China's T, down the coast and up the river. What we see with the Ro-Ro terminals in China is that they have proximity to both manufacturing plants and to the end users, which is quite convenient for us doing Ro-Ro shipping in China. On the infrastructure side, we have seen a lot of projects coming up in recent years. For example, the Three Gorges ship lift, which has helped reduce the lead time from inland in Chongqing to Shanghai to around 12 days today. Also, the Haikou port down on the island of Hainan down south is soon to be finished, supposed to be able to process around 3.1 million vehicles yearly. And we just heard the other day that Nangang Harbor in Shanghai have announced their ambitions of becoming the biggest automotive port in eastern China. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. But if nothing else, at least it's increasing. The activities in Shanghai, which is good for us who are operating in that area. So to give you a better idea of the reach of the RoRo network in China, I've plotted all the OEM manufacturing sites here. And as you can see, they're mostly located either close to the coast or with proximity to the Yangtze River. And internally at CDC, we operate with a 300-kilometer radius when we try to decide if it's financially viable to do RoRo shipping compared to road transportation. And you see here the locations of the RoRo maps, and with this 300-kilometer radius around them, we say that we have close to a 90% plant coverage and between 70 and 80% market coverage. Looking now at the Northern American or US-Mexico RoRo network, North America's U or V or funnel or something compared to China's T. Here you see this mainly a proximity to the end user, end customers. When we look at the location of OEMs in the US, one thing in particular stands out compared to China. That's the distance from plant to harbor. And when applying this methodology that we use in China, we see that North America has low to none plant coverage and 50 to 60% roughly estimated market coverage. Of course, these are different countries, different transportation conditions, but it gives a rough comparison between the networks of China and the networks of North America. For a side-by-side comparison, we see that shipping lanes in China go down the coast and up the river, while the US-Mexico have more of a dual coast setup. Proximity in China, both to plants and to the end customers, but in US-Mexico only to the end customers. In China, one of the biggest market potentials we see is Western China, this much due to the government's Go West policy. And this is also why we're currently constructing 3 new river-going vessels to be able to keep up with capacity coming out from cities like Chengdu and Chongqing in inland China. I guess for US-Mexico, Mexico, of course, the biggest opportunity for outbound RoRo. Looking at the improvement focus in China, it seems to be more on setting up new harbors, facilitating for RoRo in new harbors, and also on improving inland waterways. You're setting up new terminals here in North America as well, but as we've seen several times today, I think the focus here is more on accommodating for multimodal transportation. We can see this especially how was talked about having, you have the train railways going all the way into the harbor, making unloading and loading very easy. In China, this is something that is just on paper, at least 4, 5, 6 years off before we can come close to calling this a norm. So quite an advantage you have there compared to China. For risks and challenges, we find that in both markets. The north-south imbalance may be a bigger issue here, but it's something we experience in CDC as well. But for us in China, I think it's more of a competitive situation than a total market situation, but it's still a problem. Again, switch points between different transportation modes, not well enough developed. River bottlenecks, we see that especially up the Yangtze River due to either drought or to flooding can be problematic. And also capacity in the Chinese RoRo network. If demand keeps on rising, it'll be interesting to see if the network can keep up with capacity. For North America, I guess, the unpredictable vessel scheduling between Mexico and the US, some lack of infrastructure in Mexican harbors, and you're also challenged by very efficient railways, I guess, which is making it a little bit difficult to, or taking some capacity away. Finally, before coming here, I had a sit down with our head of RoRo just to ask him how we are currently increasing network efficiency in China and what can be some kind of closing words for this presentation. First thing that came to mind was that as a logistics service provider, we need to adapt to the network. Adapting to the network, making sure that we serve it as efficiently as we can. One way we have adopted into the Chinese RoRo network is by equipping our new river vessels with an adjustable mast, as you can see from the picture here. It ensures that we can more easily navigate the inland waterways, and keeping up efficiency even when water levels are going up, and it makes it difficult to go under bridges or other obstacles up the river. It's a very basic way of adapting, but it's something that gives us an advantage and helps keep the network moving on even through times of problem. Think beyond profit. Should probably not encourage this too much, being a logistics service provider. But we've seen in China that when we first came into the Chinese RoRo market, we positioned ourselves at a slightly lower price than our competitors. We didn't make a lot of money on it, but at least we managed to set up a good base, especially in northern China, which our presence is very strong, and it has ultimately improved the network also in northern parts of China. Working together, cooperation, it's being talked a lot about that. One area of interest for us is cooperation between short sea operators such as us and deep sea operators, the more international players. If we can help transport vehicles from the smaller harbors in China and consolidate them in the bigger harbors, it can potentially give for more predictability for the OEMs. It makes it easier for the international shippers, and of course, it also keeps us in business. Also, communicate is important. I think in order to increase network efficiency, of course, your customers, the OEMs, they need to know of the problems we're facing in the networks. But it's also important that all other actors, harbor authorities, railway operators, regulators, the government, know of the problems we face and are aware of how we're trying to solve these problems. We have to communicate. We have to get together to find the solutions to these problems if we're going to optimize network efficiency. Great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Xie Vegard. Again, I think it gives you, for those of you who might not have been so familiar with the Chinese network and market, I think it's pretty remarkable when you look at, obviously, the size and scale. You look at the amount of barge transport that's happening, internal, domestic, RoRo shipping. It's substantial what's moving up and down the coast there, and the potential for growth and investment that's there as well. I mean, the figures for the Chinese market are just mind-boggling sometimes. And I think the One Belt, One Road, I mean, that's a weird term if you're not kind of looking at China, but that refers, as Vegard talked to a kind of expansion of the old Silk Road project, right? And so one part of that is I think it's a 9,000 kilometer rail link between Germany and northern China. So, I mean, you put that in the 6,000 miles or whatever it is, you put that into the context of what we do in North America here, and it's quite impressive. So thank you again for that. Thank you to all of our panelists for their insight and input. We have some time for Q&A, so I'd like to open it up now. It's the usual format. We'll have some mics going around. You can put your hand up, say your name and company. Is there anyone who wants to kick us off? We have a question right in the far corner.
Good morning. Andre Amalay, the Northwest Seaport Alliance, and I have a question for Bill Kerrigan. So you state that the Mexico exports are going to grow to 1.7 million. And my question is, as that volume grows, what's the future for short sea shipping? Will that reduce in demand due to port capacity, or what's going to happen?
Well, again, you can turn a page on any one of these websites and start looking up statistics. But what I've seen is that the increase in the ocean shipping from Mexico is going to be for the rest of the world, not necessarily going back to the U.S. So, yeah, short sea is going to play a vital component for the OEMs in North America in the future, but we're going to have a deep sea component, which I think for vehicles going back to South America, vehicles going to Asia, vehicles going probably to the Middle East, and how are we going to plan for that? And that's really why we need to start talking to the OEMs now figure out where these volumes are going to go and how we best plan with the other partners in the logistics chain. We can't have 3 vessels coming in one day, right? You can't have a vessel going to Jacksonville. I mean, you can, but they're all going to sit outside waiting for a berth. We need to do a better job of planning. And if we do that, it's going to help everybody else.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions, comments from the floor? We'll go right there.
Bill from Convertible Trailers. For Vegard, I saw your statement there earlier about the increase in toll fees. Was that toll fee increase between Shanghai and Beijing, between 1,400 and 2,000 RMB? That's the new difference, or is that for the total cost of transportation per unit?
The increase is in the total cost of transportation per unit between Beijing and Shanghai.
So about a 30% increase?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
From what we've experienced at CDC.
So my second question is, with the new legislation that's coming into China, GB 1589, it's going to implement a new standard, a legal and safe standard in China. What are the predicted increases in transportation costs for vehicles, road transportation specifically? What are the predicted numbers? Do you know?
I gotta say, I don't have any numbers on hand, but they say they have all the companies currently holding cars in China. They have until the end of 2017 to change out their current fleets. So I think it's going to be a lot of how efficiently the companies can do this exchange and how efficiently they can start operating under these new regulations is going to have a lot of impact on how much the price actually increases.
I'm asking these questions specifically because I want to put it all in perspective for North America and the condition here in North America, that you guys are facing far greater challenges there, going from a 20 vehicle load factor down to a 10 or less load factor, and that's quite significant. So I think that China has their hands full with many adjustments in the future.
Definitely.
Thank you, Vegard.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll have a question right in the front from someone who I think knows one or two things about Mexico.
Just a little bit. Carlos Terron with Transdevelopment. We heard from the OEMs, the railroads, the port operator, about all the challenges in Mexico, focusing more in infrastructure. The Celaya bypass is an example, the Port of Veracruz, the Veracruz bypass, etc. I can list more. But I don't think the issue is infrastructure per se. I think it's more than that. The question is not why there is no infrastructure, is how you can achieve that. And that drives you the challenge from a technical infrastructure challenge to a more political and legal challenge. For instance, Kansas City will be willing to invest in Mexico if they have the proper conditions. But they don't own the railroad, they just lease or have a concession from the railroad. So they have some limitations on that. The same for the OEMs and the ports, that's a clear example. So the question that I have is, as a group, OEMs, port operators, the railroads, do you have some kind of a lobbying group that can go and start asking for those changes that are needed in Mexico? I know that they meet with the federal government, most of the secretaries of infrastructure and communications, but I think they need to go to the Congress, not just the state Congress, the federal Congress, to start demanding those changes so they can open the doors for infrastructure investments, such as the example that Kelley gave in all industries. If that doesn't change, there's going to be a big bottleneck in Mexico. Now is the opportunity. The way I see it, now is the opportunity. The current party just lost a lot of state governorships. There's federal elections for president 3 years, so everybody's going to be kind of pumping up the political field in order to achieve votes, and this is the right time to start putting that pressure. So I don't know if you have any comments, but I don't know if I made a question or I just made a comment, but sorry about that. Thank you.
I'd like to respond. I would say, Carlos, you're right on the money. And there's a lot of activity that takes place, as you know, between our president of Mexico and the SET and the government, and et cetera. I participate in a committee group under the AAR called MURAR. And MURAR is a group that we're finding more and more support with the OEMs to help us adjudicate some of the criminals in Mexico. So we're getting a lot more support from the OEMs to do things that we need to fight through some of the cultural issues that take place in Mexico as one small piece of it. But you're right on the money in terms of what we need to do to break through some of that stuff, because it isn't so much building a siding or building a terminal to make things happen in Mexico. It's some of the things that you brought up for sure.
Please.
As a terminal operator, and me being new back to Mexico, I mean, I've talked to Kelley already. We'd be willing to join them and talking to anybody we need to talk to down in Mexico, at the SCT, at the OPPs, individual OPPs, to find out what we can do together, to improve the situation. We at SSA Marine are members of AIAG, and we're looking at this. We've got a panel put together, an FVL, Finished Vehicle Logistics Committee put together to try to match what we feel is production coming out of Mexico versus the available capacity. We're going to do a one-day summit in September around this whole problem, and we hope to have some of the government types from Mexico there so they can hear what we have to propose.
For us, I know Kia Motor Mexico, they've been working with the federal and state governments, but I know, Carlos, what you're talking about is something much bigger, really working in a collaborative way, a collective way on some of these issues. So it's a good idea. I know Kia Motors Mexico is having direct dialogue at various government levels right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly an excellent point. From the OEMs that I've spoken to in Mexico, if you take something like Volkswagen Group, which has been in Puebla for 50 years, and Puebla is almost like a German state in some ways, so maybe there's a strong influence that you can, but some of the new OEMs going in, I think the collaboration, maybe through groups like AMIA or Mura or AIG or whatever, there's really a multiplier effect there. Dr. Eduardo Solis, who's the president of AMIA, spoke at our conference in Mexico City, and he actually put logistics in the top sort of 3 issues for the Mexican automotive industry, not just the supply chain or something. And we talked then about things like lighting and extra shifts in Veracruz, and actually that's starting to happen from what I can see now. I think there's plans for Volkswagen to do it. So you can make progress there. It's a complicated process, and I think you got to work together for it. If you want a different perspective on that, I don't know, maybe you look at China. You talk about the government involvement in the industry there is on a totally different level. Vegard, your company is a private-owned company. I don't know, maybe you can give a little bit of perspective on the challenges of a privately owned company in China versus some of the state-owned operators who are effectively attached and owned by OEMs, which are owned by the state or controlled by state.
Well, what we see in China is that it's very much regionally, regions are dominated by different logistic service providers. Of course, as a private-owned company, we still have our government relations. We have our mother company at least has their own department who are focused on government relations. And we have a strong connection with the government up north. So you can sort of say that the Dongbei province, or northeastern province of China, is like our territory, while you have Ansheng, who are very strong in the Shanghai area, and other companies down south. So it's a lot about the connections you have. Where are you allowed to find business? Where can you actually find the harbors to dock at? You can find the terminals to unload your products, and where can you also find the backhaul from? There's a lot of issues that are affected by the relationships you have in China.
I think you call that guanxi, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah,
so,
correct.
But I don't think that's anything just particular to Mexico or China. Obviously, this sort of cross industry and government collaboration is important everywhere. Any other questions or comments? We'll take another one, sure. We'll just wait for the mic so we can all hear you.
Yeah, it grabbed my attention when you said that you are a private-owned company in China. I'm not familiar with the China market. What does that mean? You're 100% private? Do you have 15% government, 75%? Or I mean, what does that mean?
For Changzhou Logistics, they're 100% private-owned. All the shares are in the hands of our chairman and his closest partners. For CDC, we're owned 30% of Dalian Harbor, so we're partly state-owned, but for the operational part of our business, it's not, we don't get any directions from Dalian Harbor. We operate pretty freely and mostly directed by Changzhou.
Thank you. Kelley, I wanted to ask a little bit about, we're on the subject of collaboration. I mean, when you show your network map and you talk about places like Celaya Bypass or the Veracruz Bypass, obviously some of that is contingent upon coordinating and working with your competitor, Grupo Mexico or Ferromex, Ferrosur. Obviously, there's a strong competitive aspect to that relationship, I'm sure, but to what extent are you working with Ferromex to, get through investments or improve handover and exchanges and things like that?
We have looked at when rail supply got shaky coming into Mexico, we looked at better flows by railroads. So in other words, if you had a high flow coming into El Paso, for example, on FXE from a Western railroad, that wouldn't be something FXE would normally want to do because they're going to drag a bunch of empties out of the route miles. We looked at working with them to say, can we work a program together to where we're feeding more empties in a more efficient way into Mexico and do some sort of an exchange. So the idea was, how do we take care of the customers that we have in the most efficient way we can do it, get high utilization of the assets that were available, because if you look at what happened during those tough times, our equity in the pool, call it 100, was less than what we were getting. So we were getting less than what we were entitled to in the pool because the fleet was moving so slow and the fleet wasn't as big as it needed to be. That's been corrected. So we're not afraid to work with our competitor in times where we need to do a better job of taking care of our customers. One other example, and that is we have some tests going on that we have put our toe in the water and going into Veracruz, and we have to hand off to our competitor. And we have to work with our competitor to make sure that when we hand them those rail cars, they're not going to sit in Veracruz a long time. We got to get them back and put them back into service. And we've been pretty fortunate to have a good relationship with our competitor to get that done.
Thank you for that. Any other points or questions? Bill, you alluded, I think one of your slides talked about the places where SSA is, and Tuxpan, I think, was on there. So, I mean, can you talk about some of the potential alternatives or other options in Mexico that we might see or starting to see, whether it's Tuxpan? I know Ford is now shipping out of Mazatlan. I mean, there are kind of other ports besides some of those big names that we all kind of know between Veracruz, Lázaro, Altamira.
Well, right now, as you know, there's a huge imbalance in the volumes. Most of the volumes going out of the Gulf of Mexico, right? And that's because of the location to the plants. Obviously, Veracruz has been the major port for some time now. There's a port in the north called Altamira, which has been used occasionally by some of the plants that are up in that area. And then we have a facility in Tuxpan, which is a container terminal, but we also have some room for some ro-ro. And we're looking at with some, customers right now as a possibility. The problem is there's no rail into Tuxpan. There's no rail into Altamira. So it's only reachable by truck. So that's an added cost, I'm sure, for the OEMs, something that they have to consider in their overall logistics strategy. But we're working with them all now. I mean, there's also a significant amount of import coming into Mexico now. I won't say significant, but it's more than it has been in the past. And we're working with our carrier partners to try to match up imports and exports so we can get a higher efficiency where these vessels aren't coming in and just doing one-way shipping.
Yeah. Thank you. Pat, I mean, can you give us any update? My understanding in the Kia plant is that there is having to truck more, I think, out of there than maybe would we originally have hoped. Am I wrong or right in thinking that there's a rail link that still needs to be connected to that?
Well, yeah, Christopher, you're right. The rail infrastructure is still in planning stages. It hasn't initiated, so we are doing a truck shuttle for outbound rail, and of course that'll be a temporary solution because that just adds another touch to the car, and we all know we need to remove touches to the car, remove handling to the car to get product moved faster and more efficiently. So that is the current situation, but Kia Motors Mexico is working to get that issue corrected very quickly.
And do you plan or foresee what sort of split between the rail or short C that Kia will use?
You know, it was, you know, it's all about getting cars to the marketplace, and so that's all driven by, you know, we do things, you know, what's cost-driven, what's the best way by cost, and what's best in capacity and efficiency. So we're going to be utilizing short C. We're going to be utilizing Altamira as an exiting port, but we're also going to be using the Laredo crossing to move product in to the rest of the North American market.
Great. Okay, thank you for that. We maybe have time for one more question. Well, I'll throw one more just to Vegard to maybe give us a little bit of a sense, because we just heard from Pat about using different modes to the best advantage, and you talked in China, you use quite a lot of barge, quite a lot of ro-ro, and obviously truck. Can you give us any sense between, and I know this must vary tremendously based on location, but if you're comparing things like lead time, quality levels, cost, what do you see from a provider point of view, the different use of those different modes for China?
Well, as I mentioned, for rail, it's state-owned, so it's as a logistic service provider, we don't prefer using rail too much. For us, it's much cheaper and easier to operate using trucks. For rail and for ro-ro, there's increased competition in the market, and you see more and more harbors are willing to cooperate with us and make it easier for cars coming into the harbor and also going out. Still, I think the competitive situation is probably something that is still going to hold back the total collaboration in China for a couple of years still. So I think we need to learn to work better together, both with our competitors and with other authorities in China, if we're going to find an effective solution to the problems we face.
Okay, thank you for that, and thank you again to all of our panelists. And I mean, I think it's hopefully interesting for you to also get some of those different perspectives on other markets. We heard yesterday from PwC, for one thing, that there may well be more exports from China to the U.S. So having knowledge of the network there and how things are working, I think, is important. And also, exports from the U.S. to China, for example, are not insignificant. So understanding the total picture can only help you. So that was a great discussion. I want to thank our panel for their time. So in the next session, after you have coffee, we're going to be back in here. We're going to split into roundtable discussions. You're going to have a chance to choose which group you want to join, and we look forward to seeing you back here.